Thanks for the opportunity to make a few points in relation to finance initiatives that are needed to support business. I have to say that we have had much talk over the last number of months about the need to support small business in particular, and the talk has been encouraging from all sides. And now that we have a government in place, and indeed it was remiss of me not to wish the government well and wish Minister English, I think, is with us this morning, well, and indeed all of his colleagues, and wish them Godspeed in their very, very difficult job in the months ahead. I have concerns about the finance initiatives, and indeed, as the Minister will have seen from the various business organisations, in particular ISME, Chambers Ireland, IBEC and others, that it encourages borrowing that is extremely dangerous, arguably, at this time. There's no question, but that many businesses have been effectively wiped out, doors closed and so on, throughout the period, and that has had an enormous impact on our society, on our economy, on employment and so on. But I think as a precedent, when we're saying to people who are already on the rack that we're going to enable borrowing for you is not a good precedent to set. The other thing is that the way we underwrite these loans and the way particularly the SBCI money is distributed is through our existing bank base, who, as we learn to our expense and much frustration, cross-party politically and indeed society, their focus is on the bottom line. They must be profitable. And when we have monies being made available to us in Ireland, and at a rate of whatever it is, minus percentage at this point, I think, latest monies, and by the time that gets to SME farmer or SME shopkeeper or SME fisherman or SME carpenter, there's quite a number of percentage points added on to give profit, effectively, to banks that are already profitable. So I think it's sort of a three-card trick to say, you know, live horse and get grass. We know you were wiped out this year. We know, particularly in the tourism and hospitality world, that consumer demand and consumer sentiment, even if everything was open up, isn't such that you're going to be in a position to recoup the losses that you have had, or indeed your business model to work with capacity levels and turnover levels, and obviously the reduction in profitability as a result that's going to come out of that. And I would have much preferred to see Ireland as a state replicate the proven models that were introduced in the past in terms of ACC for funding agriculture and farming activity, or ICC in terms of industrial and commercial activity. And instead what we've done is allowed the pillar banks to do this. And as I've said, the pillar banks, even when we had public interest directors on their boards, were in a position only to serve their shareholders, whose only MO is profitability. Good for them. But I think as a state, it's wrong that we are facilitating that. And what would have been much better is, 20, 25 good underwriters, a state institution lending them. But instead we have this kind of bureaucratic group of levels through Microfinance Ireland, SBCI, the department, the pillar banks, the underwriters, and eventually the punter gets to borrow money at 4 or 5%, which carries a very substantial premium over what the money is coming to us as a country for. And I think what we are doing is taking peace of mind politically by thinking we are facilitating and supporting small enterprise, when the truth is all this is really doing is enabling the better heeled to kick on while ensuring that those who genuinely need support hit the wall. And this is a big concern for me, because we're encouraging people to strangle themselves with debt in what is already a desperate situation for most. I'm obviously from Sligo Leitrim, where we are responsible for parts of South Donegal and indeed North Roscommon, a part of the country where really only two sectors contribute in a major way to our society. It's not to take from all the others, but obviously tourism and hospitality and agriculture are our two major pursuits. And I would hope, Minister, and while wishing you and all of our colleagues well and Godspeed in the months and years ahead, that your focus can be on that. It was a little bit disheartening that tourism, for example, is sort of buried in a department with other things, which a lot of tourism operators have reached out and made contact with, I'm sure, all members in constituencies where it's such a vital component of economic activity, to protest that no measures have really come forward, other than, look, you can strangle yourself with debt while we make the banks more profitable, but other than that, you're on your own. And increasingly, through media briefings, it's becoming evident that officials or politicians or government ministers or whatever, the briefing is all too prevalent now that some businesses may not survive. So in many ways, we're throwing in the towel already. And if you look at the measures that were introduced to support business in France, for example, were on commercial rents. I think they call it the 40-40-20 scheme or something to that effect, where the state would pick up around 40% of the commercial rent. The landlord would take a 20% reduction and the tenant would pay 40%. And we did nothing like that. And there's a lot of people strangled already in terms of having had to pay commercial rents to landlords who would mortgage commitments and so on, and will find themselves in a position that they just cannot afford to reopen. And if it's a cafe or restaurant or bar or hotel, where their business model operated on kind of 60 to 80% capacity and occupancy, are now operating at kind of 25 with the social distancing rules and so on. So I think, and we have these terminologies such as helicopter money or direct financing, and the schemes that were kind of on a higher level announced in Brussels, where they were going to put about a trillion into loans and direct grants, was welcome. But we're not seeing that in the direct grants here. You know, you can borrow it, and we're adding a number of percentage points so that we're profitable, handling fees or whatever it is that we're calling it. But the reality is we're not getting the hard cash to the people who need it to help them survive this. And that is what's needed. The other thing is COVID is probably going to be around for many years. And a loan isn't going to cut it. I mean, we're going to have to directly finance and support businesses. And while, look, I mean, obviously we won't be voting. I won't be voting against the legislation. But I just think if this is the whole picture, we're going nowhere, because I think it is designed to facilitate those better heeled anyway, to borrow, to expand, to whatever. But your average Joe SME hasn't a prayer of getting this kind of money. Indeed, the SBCI, in order to get the Brexit loan, as it was, which is more or less what the COVID one was based on, were being asked to define you know, a kind of a business plan that was visionary and reinvented the wheel, for want of a better expression. And that's just not acceptable, because in advance of the COVID period, you know, all of these businesses, or many of them, you know, were profitable. They were in a position to make money. They were in a position, most importantly, to create employment. And we obviously had big numbers employed. Obviously, many of us would like to see them paid more, but nevertheless, people were employed. So I appreciate this as part of a picture. I would say that I would much prefer if the state moved back to the ACC-ICC model, where we had direct control, where we weren't looking at profitability and we were looking at supporting the sectors and industries that required it. I'd say this is a start, but it's not remotely the sort of start I would have hoped for, and I hope we start stripping out all the bureaucracy, stripping out all the handling fees, stripping out all of the need to make our pillar banks more profitable than they already are, and get with the programme and say, how do we get money, simplify it, to the people who need it fast, to get them generating economic activity, create jobs, and please God, a little bit of profitability for themselves in due course, though that's not a word many businesses would be able to countenance in the year ahead, or maybe two. Very finally, if I could just conclude, Last Ciancurla, I think, well, not directly related to microfinance industry, but in terms of having financial resources to support business and indeed other ways. I think having the Dáil sit here in the convention centre is an abject waste of taxpayers' money at $25,000 a year. I think it is shameful that in Leinster House, where each of us have our own self-incubation unit with a monitor on front of us to watch proceedings, with some will and just a pinch of imagination, we could have a fully functional Oireachtas on the campus where it was intended to be, rather than wasting $25,000 a day down here needlessly, with all of the facilities required and just that pinch of imagination. If employed, we could all be back up on Kildare Street doing our work as people expect. Thank you.